Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Everyone's streaming in. How are you today, Kelsey?
Good, thanks, Gandeep. How are you going?
Good, cold, but we must persevere. I have a heater set and I am warmed up and ready to chat. That is great. Okay, we'll wait for a few more people to join. Um, So anyone who joined us last week or last fortnight, we started our webinar series. So we had the first of our webinar, and today we're here for chapter two in what will be an ever-going collection of webinars. Did you have any? Well, we had some great feedback. Thank you to those who filled out the survey as well. We're always going to keep taking on board your feedback, considering how we can make these webinars as best suited to you and your interests. And a topic that has come up for us a lot, whether it's in our personal coaching with our lovely users or even just through messages. I know, Kelsey, you get a lot of questions on Instagram and via email as well, is about how we can build better habits. So we will be covering that today. We will wait for a few more people to join, but in the meantime, we'll let you know who we are. So my name is Gundeep Sonpal, and I am the head of nutrition here at Fat Secret. My role here is to think about how we can support everyone on our app to build those better habits, whether that's through calorie counting, food logging, or enjoying our lessons on our learning center. It does all come down to habits. So I've got experience in behavior change for weight loss, and which is why this topic, I'll do my best to stick to the time, but this is a topic I love talking about because we, at the end of the day, are a series of habits, whether they're habits that get us closer to our goals or habits that perhaps get us away from our goals. So, what I really love to do is when I'm coaching someone one-on-one, is to really get to the root cause of things and understand perhaps how you got to where you are and how we can get you to where you want to be. So, Kelsey, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. My name's Kelsey. I'm a nutritionist and also work in content at Fat Secret. You might have seen our newsletters in your app inbox or email, and also if you're a premium user, the Learning Center. So I help out with that content to help our users understand more about nutrition and how they can achieve their weight loss goals.
Perfect. I guess maybe we can talk a bit about our habits first before we start getting everyone to reflect on theirs. Are there any habits that you're working on at the moment that you're either trying to change or introduce from scratch?
Yes, I think I've been trying to run more consistently. And I think like a big thing that we'll talk about today is barriers and sort of trying to think of some of the barriers that are getting in the way of me running consistently, and how I can still sort of run and maybe do different versions of my run depending on how I'm feeling so that I'm still keeping up that habit.
Perfect. Great. Well, I know you've come strides, I guess, whatever the phrase is there, with your running habits. That's great. For me, it fluctuates. Water intake is always something I have to make a really concerted effort to drink enough water. It's very easy to get through the day and, not pause to hydrate. So water is one I'm always focusing on. And I'm also looking at ways on how I can maintain my habits over the weekend. I find it relatively okay to get into a bit of a groove during the week, eating healthy, preparing my breakfast, preparing my lunch. But it's generally the weekend where I find things a bit challenging. So I will share a little bit about maybe the habit I'm working on in case that inspires anyone else. So, in today's session, we're going to be covering a lot of what we've just said. So, we want to talk about why is it that weight loss habits are so hard to stick to, whereas there are a lot of other habits we can do without even thinking. We'll talk a bit about what I'm sort of calling the lie of motivation. That is, we all sort of assume motivation is all you need. And we'll get into a little bit of the science here. We'll talk about the role of the hormone dopamine, which leads to habit formation. We'll then talk about the habit loop that we can see every day in the things that we do. And then I'll hand over to Kelsey to talk to us about how to make this habit stick. So we will pause throughout. I'd love to use our Q&A feature on Zoom, which at the bottom, if you're on your desktop computer, you should have a section to post a Q&A, like a question, and then we can pause to answer them. And we also have our chat feature where you can respond to any questions that we might ask you. Because I'm going to start by getting you to think back. cast your mind back now 6 months ago. This is a good timing for this webinar to think back to January. So think back to, it's been after Christmas, New Year's Day has come about. Everyone's asking you, what's your New Year's resolution? So for me, it was drinking more water, or maybe it was taking your lunch to work, or taking up running, or, definitely going for a walk at lunchtime. So I'd love everyone, if you can, to please pop in a habit that you've been trying to work on since January, whether it was this January or the previous one. So if you click on the chat section, if you just want to pop in the habit that you're working on, we'd love to hear from everyone. Oh, chat is disabled. Okay, thank you for that. Instead of that, if you want to just pop it in the Q&A section and then we can just take it as an answer there. Thanks for that, Laura. So what is a habit that you've been trying to work on from the start of the year? So you might find that it's a habit that you've actually tried previous years, but it didn't stick. You'll often get like that big kick at the start. You'll get excited. You'll get that motivational drive to do something different. You might try it and it might be exciting, but then it will very quickly fade and you'll sort of fall back into old habits. And walking and water, great. They're good ones that we can work through here. So why is it that weight loss habits specifically are so hard to stick to, whereas there's so many other habits which we do automatically? The challenging thing here is that weight loss can be quite slow, but the effort you have to put in is every single day, or it's several times a day. It's at every meal, it's at every moment you can do activity. So you don't really get that reward very quickly. So you might eat healthy for a day or two, step on the scales, nothing happens. You think, what's the point? Whereas on the other hand, there are some other habits, things like checking your phone or eating your favorite chocolate. When you do those, you get that instant gratification. You get that hit of dopamine, which is a feel-good hormone. So naturally, when you're given the choice of two things, you're going to want to choose the option that gives you that instant hit of satisfaction. So let's talk about dopamine. So dopamine is a hormone and it's associated with the body's pleasure and reward system. So think about hormones as a messenger in the body. They're released in different parts of the body and they travel through the blood and they tell your body to do something. So it's just like a bit of a messenger. And dopamine's specific role is about giving you that sense of pleasure. So when we talk about the word motivation, actually it's quite interlinked with this. So it's released when we do something that's pleasurable to the mind or body. And originally we were evolved to get this feeling, to encourage us to do things that we had to do for survival. To survive, we need to eat, we need to mate, and we need to be social. So when we did those things, that being the stimulus, it would then release that feeling of dopamine. You'd feel amazing, you'd feel great. And then that reinforces this behavior. So, you do the stimulus, you get this positive feeling, and you then reinforce to do that. And that's when a positive memory is created. When I do X, Y happens. Okay, I'll keep repeating that because it felt good. And that's when, if you do it again and again, that's when a habit forms. You know how you felt, you want to chase that feeling. And for every up, there is also a down. And that's when you get that dopamine crash and you feel a bit flat and you think, how can I not feel flat? I can repeat that behavior that I have the memory of, get that hit of dopamine, feel good, and then, as you can imagine, it kind of goes up and down. So dopamine doesn't have to come just from big things. It can come from small little examples. I know for me, there's a satisfaction if you get a mosquito bite, you're not meant to scratch it. But when you scratch it, you get that feeling of satisfaction. It's a certain level of pleasure that comes from that. Or it could even be eating something sweet. As soon as it touches your tongue, you get that positive feeling and you're going to want to keep going for more and more bites. So this cycle is actually happening hundreds of times a day without us actually even realizing. And it's interesting to think of it in the inverse. So when the dopamine cycle isn't being regulated or when it's imbalanced, that's when people can have feelings of depression, when they can't get that hit again. So dopamine can be divided into two sections because the reality is that unfortunately humans are lazy. So if there is a way of getting easy dopamine, we're going to take that. So if we have a look at what's here on easy dopamine, we've got, binging your favorite TV series or having a glass of alcohol, going through drive-through to get junk food on the way home, recreational drugs, social media, just scrolling endlessly, or even gambling. So while these activities might give us that instant satisfaction, positive feeling, as you can see, they're very rarely associated or very rarely going to get us closer to our goals. Um, let's get the next one there. And then there's the other side. There's the hard dopamine. And these are often the things we want to be doing to get us closer to our goals. So trying new things, being outside, resting, having good sleep, exercising, eating nourishing meals. They don't often feel instantly rewarding. So why would we do them? So understanding this is important because if we can understand this dopamine cycle, we can sort of hack it to suit us and get us to where we want to be. And this is where I want to talk a bit about motivation following on from that. So we'll often say, and I hear this with a lot of people that I speak to in coaching, we might talk about a habit they want to work on. They'll say, I just don't have the motivation. And the reality is, no one really has that much motivation to do something in the long term. Motivation can only get you so far. So think about someone you know who you consider to be highly motivated. You know, that person in your friend group that's always doing things, always reaching their goals, always ticking boxes that way. So when I was putting this together, I was thinking about one of my friends. So one of my friends, Adele, she comes to mind because from the outside, she wanted to run a marathon. So she decided, I will do that. And when I see that, I think, wow, you must be so motivated. Running is so hard. You're really doing that. But when I start looking at it at a granular level, while there's the motivation of getting the medal and getting the photo, what's getting her there is more than that. Motivation doesn't happen every day. It's actually about habits. So if we define a habit, so it's an action that you do often and regularly, and eventually, hopefully, you do it without even realizing. So if we think about weight loss isn't actually the direct or instant result of your healthy habits. You don't eat a healthy lunch and then step on the scales and lose weight. You don't go for one walk and then lose weight. Habits or weight loss as a goal, it's actually the consistent repetition of like micro habits which eventually lead to weight loss. Because as we talked about last week as well, while you don't have direct control over our weight loss, we do have control of those tiny habits which eventually build towards that goal of weight loss. So as we go through today, we're going to be talking about those kind of smaller habits which get us to where we want. Okay, I'm going to introduce a second loop now. So we learned about our dopamine cycle of craving to do something and getting that feeling. Now let's look at it in the context of habits specifically. So we have our habit which has three stages. It starts off as a cue, which is like a trigger. So without a cue, a habit wouldn't happen. So this is the starting point. So it tells you to start doing something. It could be a feeling, time of day, or a situation. We then have the routine, or that's like your response to the cue. So when the cue happens, what do you do? It's either a behavior, action, or sometimes a feeling. And then after doing that routine or response, you then get the reward. So this is the positive outcome or the feeling that you get, which makes you want to redo this loop. And interestingly, if you look at these three elements, if you don't have a cue, the habit won't start. If there's no routine or the behavior is really hard to do, you won't respond to it. And if the reward actually doesn't satisfy that true desire or craving that you have, you won't do it again because it's a mismatch. So while it is just three things, they all work very well together. So let's look at cue first. A cue can be a number of things. Time is a common one. So, morning routines, waking up and brushing your teeth. Your environment is a huge one, especially when it comes to weight. It could be your physical surroundings, perhaps the food that's available at work, or the people that you're around and how they influence you, or your access to safe walking paths that are well lit so you can go for a walk at night. There's also the preceding event. Like I said at the start, our whole day is a series of habits We wake up in the morning and we then continue to trigger the next one. So after you wake up, you might brush your teeth, and then after you brush your teeth, you might do your next habit. We then also have our emotions. So our emotion could be that when I feel down, I might call a friend, or when I'm feeling, perhaps if I'm feeling energetic, it might give me a reason to go outside. So it's important, depending on the habit that you want to achieve, the cue is very important to figure out. We then have the second stage, which is the routine or the response. So this is the actual habit that we're talking about, this action or this thought that we want to get. So the easier the response is, or when there's less barriers, less friction, or it's comes to you naturally or it's more familiar, you're more likely to do it. But if this kind of response that you're trying to get is too challenging for you, or you don't have the skills or the equipment, then it's pretty hard to do. If you told me right now that my habit needed to be that I need to rock climb 3 days a week, I don't know how to do it. I don't have the shoes, and there's no gym near me. So obviously, that's not a very good habit to start with. And let's think about a food related one, for example. So if your cue is physical hunger so the cue being time, at 3 p.m., you get hungry. If you get to the kitchen and you're faced with two options, you've got a plate of chocolate, which is perhaps unwrapped, easy to grab, or you know you're meant to prepare yourself a healthy snack, which you might not have all the ingredients and takes a bit more time. Because we tend to choose the path of least resistance, our response to our 3 p.m. hunger will be probably to reach for the chocolate. So the environment, like we talked about, is very important there, or making it easy, in fact. Okay, this is the last stage before I hand over to Kelsey. So reward is the final stage of the habit cycle. So you're cued at a certain point, you then have your response or your routine, and then you get a reward. And so the reward is the end goal of every habit. And like we said, dopamine is likely what we're feeling when we get that sense of reward. And the reward actually has two purposes. First of all, it satisfies us temporarily. We get that spike, we get that feel good. It also then teaches us. It teaches us that, hey, if I, for example, go for a walk at the end of after a long meeting, I learned that I actually felt really good. So now next time I have a long meeting and I feel tired, I know that if I go for a walk, I'll probably feel good. And I'll keep doing that cycle till it's automatic. And our brain can sort of detect these things. So your body's always looking for, it's seeking desire and pleasure, and it's trying to avoid negative feelings. So it'll keep course correcting as you go. So before I pass on to Kelsey to talk about making habits stick, were there any questions about the dopamine cycle, motivation, or the theory behind of what the habit loop is? You're welcome to ask them now, or you can sit on them and send them through, and then we can cover them at the end. Perfect. Sounds like I covered it well. Okay, Kelsey, I'll hand it over to you to talk about making habits stick.
Thanks, Gundeep. So yeah, now that we understand a little bit more about the habit cycle and how to build a habit, let's try and understand how we can actually make those habits that we decide to do stick and become automatic over time. So the first thing is really understanding how to make that habit loop work for you. We know that habits follow this routine of cue, routine, reward, but we can actually tweak each of those things to work in our favor. So let's take a habit that you might want to change. So for example, the example Gundeep gave before, that around 3 p.m. every day you start to find yourself hungry and maybe reaching for a couple of biscuits. The cue for that is the time, so 3 p.m., middle afternoon. And the craving is what you're really looking for in that moment. So it might be that you need a bit more energy, a break from your work, or even just something sweet. And then the routine is that you're then reaching for some biscuits. And the reward that you're getting from doing that routine is a sugar rush, or maybe you feel a little bit better and it gives you something to look forward to as well. But if we want to change that habit of eating biscuits every afternoon, we need to figure out what that craving is actually about. If it is that you're hungry, are the biscuits really just the fastest thing for you to grab? Or is it that maybe you're a little bit bored or mentally drained from the day and you're using that as a reason to have a break? So if it is hunger that's driving that habit cycle, something like fruit or yogurt and crackers and cheese might be a better solution. Or if it's boredom or fatigue, you might be better off stepping outside for a few minutes or chatting with someone to reset your brain. But the reason this matters is really understanding if you don't understand the craving, that habit won't feel satisfying or last if you were trying to change what the routine was. So instead of removing habits, we can redirect them to be more useful and successful. So let's talk about a common trap that makes it hard to build habits, and that is trying to change too much at once. So we see this a lot in coaching when we're speaking to our users who have decided that they want to lose weight. You sort of have this rush of motivation at the beginning and you want to completely overhaul your entire lifestyle. So that might mean that you start cooking completely different meals or exercising every day when you weren't doing that before, or even starting to cut out entire food groups or start tracking absolutely everything you're eating and doing this all at once. So you might be familiar with the famous book Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talks about this idea of making small changes and small improvements day by day and letting those build over time. Because basically he says that there's no difference if you were to make a 1% better change each day or a 1% worse change each day. It's not going to impact you very much in that moment. So whether I decide to go to Pilates after work today or whether I decide to skip it today, it's not going to make a huge difference today. But if I was to have that as a habit and start doing that every day for the next 6 months, or decide not to do that every day for the next 6 months, that decision's really going to compound, and how I'll look and feel in 6 months would be very different depending on which habit I chose. So it's sort of like thinking about your superannuation or interest in your bank account. You're only making such slight contributions over time, so they might seem really insignificant, but over time they really do add up. So the same slow and steady approach will work for building habits for weight loss. So instead of trying to change everything overnight, we should really focus on what continuous improvement can I start doing and start making some slight adjustments to our everyday habits and behaviors. So for example, if you are in the habit right now of getting takeaway lunch most days, if you were to say, I'm going to make the habit of making my lunch every day, it's likely that that's not going to stick. And you might be better off just doing it once or twice a week for now and building up from there. And then the next way to sort of help with making your habits stick is finding different ways that you can scale your habit. So you might have experienced life getting in the way of your habits before. Coming back to my habit of trying to be more consistent with running. It's not daylight savings anymore, so I sort of was in the habit of running more frequently, but now it's getting dark by the time work is finished, and that's my reason to not go for a run anymore. And I did find that if that might have happened one day and then maybe the next week I thought, oh, yeah, I'm not going to go for a run again. And eventually my habit has slowly started to slip to not actually doing it at all. So that's where having different levels of your habit can really help. And this concept is sort of like having a backup plan for when your habit doesn't go to plan. So even if you set up that really solid habit loop, there will always be days where you might run out of time or things don't go to plan. So instead of thinking of your habit as something that is really fixed, you can create different versions of your habit. So that way, if you can't do the full habit, like for me, if I can't go for a run, there's still other things that I can do to continue that habit so that I don't stop it being part of my routine. And that when you're setting up a new habit, that'll be the difference between the habit actually sticking and it not. So you can think about having an optimal version of your habit. So in this example on the slide, their optimal habit is a 45-minute gym session. But on the days where maybe you're running late on the way home from work or you're a little bit more tired, you can have a moderate version of that habit, which is a 20-minute home workout. And then on the days where you're really, really pressed for time, you could have an even scaled down version of that habit, which could just be a 10-minute walk. So if you compare that to the optimal habit, if the person didn't have scaled versions, they might think, I don't have time to go to the gym today, so I'm just going to skip it altogether. But if you have those easier scaled down versions of the habit, you can still sort of keep that loop going so that the habit can stay around and you won't drop off on it. So it sort of avoids that all or nothing thinking mindset where if you can't do it perfectly, you don't do it at all. And then another way to make your habit stick is making sure they're really easy and sustainable. So a habit's not going to form if you just do it a few times. It comes from something that you do really consistently. But if you want to be consistent with a habit, it has to actually be something that's easy enough for you to do and keep repeating often. So something we also see a lot in nutrition coaching is people getting stuck trying to lose weight because they're trying to stick to habits that are just super complicated and really time consuming to keep up long term, or also trying to start some healthy habits that are really far away from what they're doing now. Like that example of making lunch every day when you maybe at the moment buy lunch every day. While you might be able to stick with that in the beginning, that's going to be really challenging for you to keep up if you jump straight into that. So instead of thinking, what's the best thing that I could do right now to help me lose weight, it's more helpful to start thinking, what's something that I can do consistently? Because if we look at the example of the calendar here, if you were to be doing a 45-minute workout very sporadically across the month, or if you were to do an easier habit of shorter 20-minute workouts, it's going to be more beneficial for you to do the more consistent one and start establishing that habit. And then once the habit is solid, you can start building upon it from there and jumping into more longer workouts. But yeah, the key is to make it simple enough to fit into your daily life without huge effort, which will make it more likely for you to keep on going. And then another way to make your habit stick is to really reduce the barriers. So as Gundeep mentioned before, we can be quite lazy by default, and it's just the way we're wired. Our brains are always trying to conserve energy and choose the easiest option. So sometimes if it feels like something is going to take too much effort or it's going to take too long, we're just not going to stick with it. Even if we really want to do something, there's always going to be barriers that get in the way and make it harder for us to do. So if we're trying to build a new habit, it's important to really reduce the barriers that will stop us from following through. And so I have a couple of examples. The first one is to prepare your habit in advance. So that will be setting up things so that the decision is already made for you. So one I like to do is if I know I want to go for a run in the morning, I'll always set out my clothes the night before so that everything is set up. And then when I wake up, the decision is already made for me. The next one is to keep things in sight. So healthy actions are easier when things are more visible and obvious. So if you're wanting to drink more water, you could leave a water bottle on your desk and it'll make you more likely to do it when it's right in front of you. The next one is simplify the habit. So remove those extra steps that are making it harder for you to perform that routine. So if you want to start eating healthier and cooking more at home, instead of spending 20 minutes each night deciding what to cook, slowly build up a selection of easy dinner recipes that you know how to make and you can go back to them. And then the last one is to use reminders or cues. So set up things that help you remember the habit. So that could be if you're trying to log more food, you could set up reminders in the Fat Secret app, and that gentle nudge can really help you to follow through on that habit. And one last thing, when it comes to habit building, reward really is key. It's what tells your brain that was really worth doing, and I'm going to keep doing it again. But when you think about setting up habits for weight loss, the reward really isn't immediate. You could eat well for a week and log all of your food and exercise, but the scale might not change. So that's like what Gundeep was talking about before. That's considered a hard dopamine reward. It's going to take you time and consistent effort for you to be able to feel it. So in the beginning of a weight loss journey, we really need to create that easy dopamine. So small and satisfying wins that are going to keep you going at the habit long term while those results are building in the background. So when you're trying to form a habit, something like ticking off on a habit tracker each day that you've done the habit can really help. We have it in the Fat Secret app with the streaks on the top of the diary page if your habit is trying to log food more consistently. It might even be just rewarding yourself that you notice you've made a better change than what you did last week, or even it could come from getting a message of encouragement from someone else. These little things can give your brain that sense of like, yes, I did it. And having this early on when you're starting to build a habit is what makes it really easy to stay on track. Coming back to that habit loop again, with everything that we've covered, we really can see that it's quite a simple concept, the habit loop, but we need to think about how we can address each part of the habit loop to really make it form and stick. So I want you to take a moment and think about maybe a habit that you've struggled with in the past or something that you would like to start. Looking at the first step, which is the cue, what's actually prompting you to do that habit? Or do you have nothing that's really prompting you at all? And how can you start to make that prompt really impossible to ignore? And then the next step, routine. Is there anything that's getting in the way of you performing that action? Is there a way that you can make it feel just that little bit easier? Maybe you'd planned to cook a healthier dinner, but you got home late or you felt too tired and ended up just ordering Uber Eats instead. Could you start removing that barrier by having a frozen backup meal or prepping earlier in the week to make it easier for you to follow through? And lastly, the reward. Is it the true desire or craving really being satisfied? When you do follow through, is it actually feeling good? If your brain isn't feeling any reward or any acknowledgement for performing that habit, it's not going to want to repeat the habit and make it automatic. Okay, so let's finish on an analogy. So the important thing to remember is that building a habit really takes time, and especially if you're trying to change something that you've been doing for a really long time. So you can think of an existing habit like a path that you've been walking through the bush for a long time. Over time that path is cleared and there might not be any obstacles through the path. And your brain probably walks through there and performs this habit on auto drive without you even having to think about it. And if you're to change a habit or create a new habit, this is like walking down a different path in the bush that you don't walk down often. And there might be a lot of obstacles and it might be a little bit more challenging to walk down, or it might even feel exciting and new. But out of habit or ease, you might go back to the original path, and it's okay if in the beginning you're switching between that easier path that you're familiar with and the new path. But the more often you keep walking down that path that might have had all of the obstacles, or performing the new habit, the easier and more automatic it will get, and the path will get clearer.
Perfect. Love that analogy. Thank you. So if anyone wants to ask us any questions, perhaps there's a habit that you're stuck with and you want us to sort of help you work through it, we can give it a quick go here on the webinar, but this is definitely something we love to talk about in our coaching sessions as well. As you were going through, it was making me think of a few habits or things I've been trying. So I mentioned at the start that I'm trying to drink more water. So every now and then that habit seems to creep up on me that I need to focus on. So for example, originally my cue was having a water bottle on the table. So I'm changing my environment and it's right there. But the problem was my water bottle was a big heavy one with a big difficult lid. So every time I had to have water, I had to open this up, have a chug of water and then close it and put it away. And I was like, this isn't working for me. So I changed my cue. The water bottle is still here, but my response is now different. So I've made things easier. I've now swapped to water bottle with a straw. I don't have to open the lid. I can be doing two things at once. The barrier is now gone. As long as I keep it filled up, so maybe a bigger one would be helpful. So that's just like a simple example of how it's a small change can make that difference. And it was also making me think of a few people I'd coached in the past. So, walking, I know someone else has said that they want to be walking more. They they realized that when they decided, okay, now it's time to go for a walk, there was still so many steps between then getting your steps outside. They had to, get dressed, put their shoes on. So they decided, okay, I'm just going to start the day wearing runners. I know I'm home, I'm sitting at my desk, but if I'm wearing runners, then when I get that motivation or that burst of energy to want to go outside, the only thing stopping me is opening the door. So it's those little things which sometimes feel a bit silly at the time, but set you up so it's the easiest thing to do. Similarly, snacking. I know that's quite a common thing that people come to us to talk about. This example, I'm thinking of someone I was coaching in the past where when they were cooking dinner, they go to the cupboard looking at tonight's ingredients, and then the chips were there or the crisps, so they were reach for them really easily. And so while they're cooking, they're snacking. By the time it came to eating dinner, they were kind of lost their appetite, right? And they'd eaten so many calories. So we did a simple switch. We moved the crisps to a higher shelf, and then we just replaced. We knew she was going to be reaching into the cupboard at that level. We just replaced it with something else. So the cue was feeling hungry at dinner time. The response before was reaching for crisps. So we just changed out the response. And then the reward, she felt satisfied. She was able to still eat her dinner. So then that cycle was then reinforced. So it's often these little minor little swaps, I think, that if you're consistent with can, yeah, really add up.
Mm. It really goes to show how habits truly are automatic as well. I think in that case, like often we do just snack and it gets to the point where we do it so often we don't even realize that we're doing it. And it can take that little switch of just moving something to sort of disrupt that automatic habit where you go to reach for something and it's not there, or I even find it with social media apps on my phone. My brain just knows exactly where Instagram is, and sometimes I'm scrolling before I even realize that I'd clicked on it, and I'm scrolling. And if I do a little reshuffle of the apps, I'll, like click on another app and it's not Instagram. It just
Yeah.
shows I've really built up that habit when I'm looking for that dopamine release to start scrolling, and sort of a little shift of where I keep the apps can disrupt that.
Totally. And that's you changing your environment, whether that's like digital or like in person, I suppose. So, as you can tell, we love talking about habits. So, we have on our Learning Center. So, for our premium members, you're able to access our Learning Center, which is a collection of courses and lessons. So, we've written one called the 14-Day Habit Builder for Weight Loss. So, we released this earlier this year, and it's definitely one of our top two most popular courses, actually. And what it does is across the span of 14 days, if you want to read the article one a day, we're going to hold your hand through the process of starting a new habit. We're going to help you with a lot of these self-reflective questions, which I appreciate don't come naturally for everyone. And sometimes it's nice to have someone to guide you through that thinking. So you can see here, we've got on the right-hand side, we've got quite a few lessons that you'll work through. So if you're a premium member, I highly recommend checking this out. And yeah, this is just one of our many courses that are coming out. We've got Heart Health that we've just finished writing, which will be coming out in a couple of months as well.